Chapter 696. Although Chu Yang did not have a good impression of the Black Devils, he still felt sour in his heart. Was it cruel? Was it cruel? No. Because the Black Devils had no other choice. This was because the battle between the martial kings and the martial emperors was separate. The martial kings would go first. Therefore, if the Black Devils made any moves, the remaining martial emperors would immediately be annihilated. Chu Yang concluded that the Black Devils would betray him during the battle between the martial emperors. Therefore, these martial kings had to be sacrificed. If these people betrayed him, the Black Devils would definitely be annihilated. If these people died, those people would have a chance to make a name for themselves. They would have a slight chance of survival. And all of this was a painful choice that the Black Devils made for his daughter. With a long sigh, Chu Yang pulled out his long sword. Qin Ji's body fell softly. Chu Yang thought to himself, I will pass on your words to Wu Shong. Then, he roared as if he was venting the frustration in his heart. He turned around and charged madly into the crowd. Everyone was shouting about the fierce battle, so who would pay attention to such an insignificant scene in the millstone of flesh and blood? When the two teams came into contact, they saw that both sides were advancing. They were advancing madly. However, the people on Chu Yang's side passed through, leaving behind a ground full of broken corpses. They occupied the other side's camp. As the other side charged forward, they became a pile of minced meat. By the time the two sides brushed past each other, they had already exchanged positions. The other side had more than 1,000 martial kings. Now, there were less than 500 left. On Chu Yang's side, there were still more than 800 people who were at full strength. Both sides were panting violently. Their eyes were bloodshot as they stared at each other. They were preparing for the battle that was about to begin. It was a battle of life and death. In the sky above the battlefield, blood mist filled the air. On the ground, blood meandered and gradually formed a river of blood. It curved and flowed into the distance. At first, it was still emitting hot air. Later, the hot air slowly dissipated and the river froze. Tian Bu Hui rushed over angrily. He rushed in front of the Black Devils. What's going on? Why are the people of the Black Devils so weak? We just came into contact and they are all gone. What does that mean? The Black Demon looked at the black-clothed corpse and the pieces of flesh on the ground. His face behind the mask seemed to be convulsing in pain. He gritted his teeth as he spoke in a deep voice. This old man has said this before. The assassins that I have trained must be in the dark. They must be able to display their greatest power. 2 king-level experts can even assassinate an emperor-level expert. But how did you arrange it? You actually exposed my assassin in front of the enemy, and then fought him head-on. You ruined all of my efforts, and now you actually ask me why my combat strength is so weak. He took a step forward and glared at Tian Bu Hui. Did you see that they are all dead? Could it be that the corpse is fake? Did you see them running away at the last moment? Is there? He glared at Tian Bu Hui angrily as he stepped closer to him. Now, you're actually asking me what I mean by this. Let me ask you, what are your intentions? When he said this, everyone felt that Tian Bu Hui was too much. The Black Devils were very strong, but they were only good at assassinating in the dark. The people of the Black Devils had never fought with their enemies head-on. Tian Bu Hui was using such a reason to criticize the Black Devils. Furthermore, it was under the premise that the Black Devils were all dead. He was being too demanding. The two of them were on the verge of breaking out into a fight. At this moment, there was a loud roar. Everyone's attention was attracted to it. Chu Yang shouted, "Brothers! Throw them all into the lake of despair." All 800 people shouted together, "Throw them all into the lake of despair. Kill." Chu Yang raised his sword. His eyes flashed with coldness and ruthlessness as he charged forward. Behind him, the group of people charged forward like a tide. Now, there were no more Black Devil assassins in the group. This kind of result made Chu Yang feel stuffy in his heart. He also felt a burst of anger and sorrow. Therefore, he had to give it his all and kill. Beside him, Xiedan Qiong's white robe flashed. The two of them charged forward side by side. Kill. On the other side, there was also a loud roar. They raised their swords and sabers. Their faces were twisted as they charged forward. Both sides only had eyes for their enemies. There was nothing else. Occasionally, they would trip over something. No matter whose corpse it was, they would kick it far away. Don't blame me. Maybe in the next moment, I'll be like you. Lying on the ground with a broken body, I'll be kicked away. Chu Yang let out a clear roar. His sword roared as it flew up. He was about to kill. However, just as he was about to make his move, he realized that a bright flower had already bloomed in front of him. That flower was like a fairy. It flashed in the air. It flashed to the left, then to the right. In a flash, it disappeared again. However, that flower was so beautiful that no one could bear to touch it. They couldn't bear to look at it. They couldn't even bear to think about it. The beauty of this flower had reached the pinnacle of this world. But what this incomparably beautiful flower brought was death. Because every time it flashed, every time it appeared, it was accompanied by a life. It was taken away while intoxicated by this flower. Every face that had been taken away by the flower still had traces of admiration and intoxication on them. It was as if they were willing to die under such a beautiful scene. It was intoxicating. Even in such a cruel battle, the appreciation of extreme beauty couldn't be erased. However, when beauty reached the pinnacle, it was darkness and destruction. After this flower flashed, blood would definitely flow. This was the flower of death. Viburnum flower. When the viburnum flower appeared, all other flowers would die. The power of the viburnum flower was truly displayed at this moment. This was a kind of cruel beauty. This was elegant cruelty. This was the ultimate kill of a gentleman. This kind of extreme beauty brought about extreme cruelty. Even the big clans and law enforcement officers were moved by it. Xiedan Qiong finally unleashed the true power of the viburnum flower. Even Chu Yang was seeing such a massacre for the first time in his life. However, Xiedan Qiong's face was calm and indifferent. With indifference to life, the viburnum flower continued to attack. It flew back and attacked again. Chu Yang thought in his heart, if Xiedan Qiong can also smile as brightly and gently as the jade jasper flower when she makes her move, then perhaps that would be the ultimate. Although he thought so, his hands didn't stop at all. With a swing of his sword, Chu Yang attacked first. A white sword light danced in the air. Chu Yang flew through the air and landed at the densest part of the crowd. With a wave of screams, his sword swept across. Puff, puff, puff. 3 people were cut into 2 at the waist. 7 big men pounced on him from 3 directions. Chu Yang rushed forward. With 2 puffs, the tip of his sword cut through 2 big men's backs. Then, it disappeared with a whoosh. With a sliding step, he moved to the right side as if he was dancing alone on the ice and snow. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 3 heads flew into the air. 3 swords were broken in an instant and floated in the air as if they were weightless. The corpse had yet to fall to the ground, the broken sword had yet to touch the dust, and the buoyancy had yet to be eliminated. Chu Yang spun the soles of his feet, and the upper of his shoes rolled up a puff of sparkling and translucent ice and snow on the ground. His whole body had already turned around and rushed back. The 2 enemies behind him were now in front of him. With 2 claps, the 2 swords of the opponents collided with Chu Yang's sword. Wherever the sharpness of the divine sword passed, the 2 swords were separated like tofu. Chu Yang's sword extended and retracted. Then, with a whoosh, he rushed out from the gap between the 2 men. The 2 men seemed to be stunned for a moment. They suddenly turned around and wanted to chase. However, when they moved, the upper half of their bodies flew out from the waist. The 2 legs of the lower half of their bodies were still running on the snow. The 2 parts of the corpses that had just flown out met 3 swords at the same time. And, they were chopped into pieces with a catcher sound. The people on Chu Yang's side thought that Chu Yang hadn't killed the 2 men. So, they had come to besiege him. But, they had chopped the corpses. And, Chu Yang had already flown into another encirclement with a biting cold murderous aura. There were 3 king-level experts on his side in this encirclement. They were besieged by 7 or 8 people from the opposite side. They were in imminent danger. One of the king-level experts had already roared when Chu Yang arrived. His body was slashed several times. Blood splashed everywhere. Then, the swords and sabers came down together. He didn't even have time to scream as his flesh and blood flew out. Chu Yang roared and rushed forward with his sword in hand. Halfway through, his sword turned into a thick silver river of sword light. Rumbling sounds could be heard as it rushed forward. The experts on the enemy's side turned into a pile of blood. On the other side, Luo Kudi was fighting with 4 king-level experts at the same time. He roared wildly. Then, a sword silently shot out from a gap and stabbed towards Luo Kudi's waist. Luo Kudi wasn't aware of this. Chu Yang had seen it. But, he was surrounded by enemies. So, he didn't have enough time to rescue him. So, he suddenly roared and kicked out his leg. It was like a thunderbolt as it ferociously kicked the neck of a king-level expert. A catcher sound was heard. This king-level expert of the Tian clan didn't even have time to groan. His head was kicked out of his neck. Blood violently spurted out. His head spun like a meteor as it flew out like a lightning bolt. That king-level expert had launched a sneak attack on Luo Kudi. He was secretly happy that he had succeeded. But, he suddenly felt something heavy on his wrist. He found that his sword had inexplicably pierced a person's head. He took a closer look, and realized that it was his subordinate. He roared in grief and indignation. He then loudly asked, "Who is it?" However, Chu Yang had already cut off 3 heads with his sword. His entire body was bathed in blood as he stood in front of him. The 2 of them didn't speak. Instead, they fiercely slashed their swords. Bang! That king-level expert's sword broke. Chu Yang flew high up in the air, and ferociously kicked him in the chest. That king-level expert was sent flying upside down like a shrimped shrimp. The 7 king-level experts of Chu Yang's side attacked him at the same time. They intercepted him along the way. Their swords and sabers ruthlessly fell on him. He had turned into a skeleton by the time he fell to the ground. Chapter 697. Ji Mo and Huyen Aobo combined their swords and attacked back and forth in the battle formation. One of them was tall while the other was short. One attacked while the other defended. Their coordination was flawless. On the other side, Tan Tan and Xie Danfeng were much more valiant. Both of them were main attackers. Both of them were equally crazy and didn't care about their own safety. Then, they hurriedly patched up the holes in the opponent's attack. Tan Tan was on the left side of Xie Danfeng. Rui Butong was on the right side of Xie Danfeng. That was because Xie Danfeng wasn't a king-level expert even though she was participating in the battle. She was only a high-level revered martial artist. Tan Tan alone wouldn't be able to protect her in such a battle where all the king-level experts were present. Therefore, Rui Butong's main responsibility in this battle was to protect Xie Danfeng. This was Chu Yang's order. Such an order was selfish and cruel for the other king-level experts who were participating in the battle. However, Chu Yang had no other choice. Ao Xie Yun's handsome face was already full of bloodstains. It was the same color as the red scarf on his head. There were 7 or 8 wounds on his body. However, he didn't retreat even half a step. He bravely moved forward and killed his way forward. Awu tilde tilde awu tilde tilde. Tilde Luo Kudi roared loudly. His body had been cut by a saber. However, this had stimulated his ferocious nature even more. The effect of his self-destructive training in the northern wilderness had finally manifested at this moment. He roared furiously and crazily rushed forward to kill. He didn't see Chu Yang even when he appeared beside him. The entire battlefield had been reduced from more than 2,000 people fighting together. Then, it had been reduced to more than 1,000 people fighting together. In the end, only less than 700 people were left fighting. The casualty rate of Chu Yang's side in this second battle was far higher than that of the first. That was because the other side already knew that they would lose and die this time. Therefore, everyone was fighting with their lives on the line. However, Chu Yang's side had a good start. Then, they had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. So, it was inevitable that they were somewhat relaxed. This was human nature. However, It was precisely this human nature that had caused the death of more than 100 experts who should not have died in the first place. The second battle was even faster than the first battle. It didn't take long for it to end. Slowly, the battle circle became smaller and smaller, and gradually divided into three. There were less than 100 enemy experts left. They were trapped in 3 encirclements. Each of them was besieged by over 100 king-level experts. Both sides' eyes were bloodshot and ferocious. At this point in the battle, the so-called life and death, the so-called fear, had long been thrown beyond the cloud. The only thought left in his mind was to kill the enemy. He would drag the other party along with him. Killing one was more than enough. Kill 2, earn 1. You're going to die anyway, one of the enemy's middle-grade king-level experts roared. Then, he suddenly pounced over without dodging. His body was pierced by more than a dozen swords while he was in midair. But, he shook his right hand, and the sword flew out of his hand. Then, it deeply penetrated the chest of a king-level expert. The long sword pierced through his chest, leaving a trail of blood behind it as it flew across the snowy ground. It flew for over 100 feet before landing on the snowy ground with a clang. The sword swayed in the air as fresh blood dripped down, bringing with it hot air. Chu Yang issued an order, and his brothers flew up at the same time. They each pounced into the 3 encirclement. A series of ding-ding-dang-dang-dang sounds resounded. Then, a series of blood-curdling screams were heard. Then, the entire battlefield became silent. No one else was standing in the entire battlefield apart from Chu Yang's people who had red cloth tied around their head. There was a moment of silence. Then, someone suddenly bent down and vomited blood. This person had suffered internal injuries a moment ago, and had forcibly endured it. However, he had finally relaxed at this moment, and had vomited blood. Vomiting blood like this would have been equivalent to courting death if it had been a battle. The sound of vomiting resounded. Then, someone let out a long sigh, and sat down on the ground. It didn't matter if it was a broken saber, a broken sword, or even a corpse on the ground. They were exhausted. The battle a moment ago was even more terrifying than a nightmare. Chu Yang looked around, and sucked in a breath of cold air in his heart. He looked at the entire battlefield. More than 1,500 people had died here. But, he couldn't find a single complete corpse. Only pieces of flesh and blood were left on the ground. Every 1,000 people had participated in the battle. Only 100 people had participated in the battle on his own side. There were less than 400 people left alive. As for those who were physically disabled, and those who had broken arms or legs, there were countless of them. And, these were the lucky ones. Even the most brilliant coroner wouldn't be able to piece together more than 1,500 corpses under such circumstances. In fact, he wouldn't be able to piece together even 300 complete corpses under such circumstances. Everyone was a king-level expert, and each of them had risked their lives. Their flesh and blood would scatter as long as they made a mistake. And, that short period of time when they were about to die was the time when they would suffer the most damage. Everyone would rather stab a dead body with a knife than let the enemy have the opportunity to lay on the ground and launch a sneak attack. And, they wanted to die a complete death under such a mentality. It was no different from a dream. Roll call. Count off. Chu Yang stood in a depressed manner. Warm blood was still dripping from his hair. After counting, there were only 314 king-level experts on Chu Yang's side who were still alive. Including Chu Yang and his brothers. Out of 100 people who had participated in the battle, 332 had died. The bloody fog on the battlefield hadn't dispersed yet. Everyone was facing this tragic scene, and remained silent. Men. Bring the injured and unconscious back to recuperate. The rest of you, clean up the battlefield. Throw the corpses into the lake of despair. The blood vessels in Chu Yang's eyes slowly faded away. Looking at the corpses all over the ground, he gritted his teeth. His cheeks clearly bulged. He took a deep breath of the bloody air, raised his head, and let out a long, long sigh. Finally, he turned his head and shouted coldly. He gave a cruel order. Such a decision would undoubtedly be cold-blooded and cruel if it was in any other place. But here, at the Lake of Despair, Regardless of whether it was the corpses thrown into the lake of despair or the people who cleaned up the battlefield, it was a kind of honor, a kind of respect for the enemy. Only the victors could have the honor of cleaning up the battlefield. Only the corpses of heroes could be thrown into the lake of despair to accompany the heroic spirits of the past generations, under the witness of two supreme martial artists. This was the most honorable place in the three heavens, regardless of life or death. Chu Yang knew that the three heavens people thought this way, but when he said this, his heart was still in turmoil. He felt pity for them. This was because there were many people who had chatted with him just a day ago, or even just a moment ago. When talking about this battle, he still remembered that bearded martial king of the Xie clan said straightforwardly, "My life was originally picked up. If I could die in the lake of despair, my life wouldn't have been in vain. Besides, my wife and daughter have been killed by the Ao clan. I have nothing to worry about. The sooner I die, the sooner I can be reunited." Now, this martial king was quietly lying not far away, with his body incomplete. How could Chu Yang not hear the grief and indignation in his heart? The Ao clan master had compensated the few Ao clan masters for their sins. The few Ao clan masters and the mastermind behind them had all died. But his wife and daughter couldn't come back to life. In the end, he didn't take revenge with his own hands. But he couldn't take revenge anymore. Perhaps he only had one wish left, to be reunited. There was another person, the martial king of the Ao clan. Back then, when he was standing with Ao Sheyun, that skinny martial king had said to him and Ao Sheyun, "If you die in battle, if you can win and survive, when you go back, tell my son not to practice martial arts for the rest of his life. Please give him a few acres of land and let him find a wife to farm." Now, that person was also lying there. Only his head was left. Even his body couldn't be found. Chu Yang didn't know why he would feel this way. Why did he tell his son not to practice martial arts for the rest of his life? But he knew that this person, as a father, must have his reasons for saying this. Vengeance in the martial world, the intertwining of gratitude and grudges, added to the beauty of blood. But how much familial love was lost and how much common life was missed. "I will help you pass on these words," Chu Yang said silently. Then, he raised his head and quietly closed his eyes. "Brothers, rest in peace. If there is a next life, we will be friends again and fight again." Under Mo Tianji's command, the battlefield rescue team rushed out quickly. But they met with resistance. Other than those who had already fainted, those who had broken arms and legs refused to go back to rest. "We want to clean up the battlefield. We want to stay. We want to personally send our brothers and our enemies into the lake of despair. We hope that they can live and work peacefully in the lake of despair. There are no grudges in the lake of despair." Faced with these people's stubbornness, the battlefield rescue team could only choose to move the unconscious people away and return silently. Everyone seemed to be carrying out a solemn ceremony. They gathered the corpses on the ground, regardless of whether they were enemies or allies. Then, they carried the corpses in pairs and walked towards the lake of despair. Their expressions were so solemn, so respectful, and so sorrowful. Just a moment ago, they were still fighting with their lives on the line, slashing viciously at their enemies. In the blink of an eye, they had become like this. It was as if they were mourning for their loved ones. They were heartbroken, respectful, and nostalgic. Such a scene, such a change in mood, seemed abrupt. It didn't seem right. But everyone present, including the great clans and those who held the law, felt that this was how a real man should behave. This was how the lake of despair should be. Therefore, none of them made a sound. They only watched quietly and respectfully. More than 300 people were slowly cleaning up the battlefield. They didn't even let go of a drop of blood. They respectfully held it up and sent it into the lake of despair. The speed of cleaning was extremely slow, but everyone seemed to be more patient and tolerant at this moment. As the corpses of the deceased were thrown into the lake of despair, ripples slowly appeared on the surface of the lake. Circle after circle of ripples gradually spread out, merging into one piece after another. It was as if the dead were bidding farewell to the living. The sky was gloomy. Slowly, the cold wind whistled. It actually started to snow. Tomorrow would be the final battle of the martial emperors. Another batch of corpses of heroes would be added to the Lake of Despair, which hadn't changed since ancient times. Jiyu Duxing stood quietly in front of his tent. As he watched this scene, he thought about the final battle that should belong to him tomorrow. Suddenly, his heart trembled with excitement. He raised his eyebrows and sword energy surged to his chest. With a clang, the black dragon sword actually jumped out of its scabbard. It shone with a cold light and lay across the sky. All the experts present, including the great clans and those who held the law, were caught off guard. The long swords at their waists let out a crisp sword sound at the same time. It was as if they were about to struggle out. They worshipped the king. The sword emperor appeared, and all swords submitted to him. Instantly, a wave of astonished gazes looked over from all directions. Chapter 698. That night, Jiyu Duxing stood alone in front of his tent. He didn't move at all for the entire night. Heavy snow fell from the sky. Jiyu Duxing quickly became a snowman. However, he seemed to have entered a strange state. He didn't care about anything around him. Chu Yang sat quietly about 70 to 80 feet in front of him. He didn't say anything and didn't move. Soon, he also became a snowman. Behind him, in the tent, under the flickering candlelight, Mo Tianji held a book in one hand and read it quietly. Ji Mo, Luo Ku Di, Dong Wu Shong, Rui Biu Tong, Tan Tan, Xiedan Qiong, Ao Xieyun, and the rest sat quietly in different parts of the tent. Their eyes seemed to be open, and they were all resting. However, an invisible aura spread out from the tent and faintly formed a large circle with Chu Yang outside. It shrouded Jiyu Duxing, who was immersed in his epiphany, and protected him inside. Jiyu Duxing's state was very rare. It was a crucial stage on the path of martial arts. He couldn't be disturbed by anyone. Therefore, all the brothers acted as his protectors without prior agreement. They didn't sleep for the entire night. They weren't the only ones who didn't sleep for the entire night. It was as if the members of the dominant clans had discovered a treasure. They were also observing Jiyu Duxing's side from all directions. Even the enforcers were waiting quietly. Tian Biyu Hui didn't do anything. He was warned by the enforcers. Before the battle between martial emperors begins, no one is allowed to act rashly. This warning was obviously biased towards Jiyu Duxing. Tian Biyu Hui was so angry that his stomach almost exploded. The enemy was breaking through right in front of him, but he couldn't disturb him. What kind of logic was this? Waiting for him to break through so that he could kill us? And the enforcers were so unfair. However, Tian Biyu Hui had misunderstood. The enforcers weren't just biased. A sword sovereign. He was rare even in the upper three heavens. He was a legendary existence. There were many martial monarchs and martial saints in the dominant clans. However, how many of them were called sword sovereigns? One had to know that each of these large clans had tens of thousands of years of heritage. Didn't they know how powerful sword sovereigns and sword sovereigns were? How could they not nurture them? However, after 10,000 years, how many had they nurtured? Not to mention that it was actually a sword emperor who hadn't even reached the age of 20. Moreover, it was obviously not primary stage 1. The shock this brought to everyone was simply unparalleled. No matter who it was, being able to witness the process of a sword emperor's breakthrough was extremely beneficial. Yi Shiyu praised in a low voice, "This little guy looks even more abnormal than my elder brother. My elder brother was already 22 years old when he broke through to the first stage of sword sovereign. This guy is obviously only 10 years old and definitely not 20 years old, and from the looks of it, he's about to break through to the second or third stage. What a monster." Although his voice was still feminine, because he was whispering in a low voice, it was not coquettish. "Be quiet." The Yi clan's expert bodyguard beside him hastily reminded him. "I know." Yi Shiyu rolled his eyes and twisted his waist. The guard immediately rolled his eyes and slapped his own mouth in regret. "Look at my mouth. I made him whine again." The people from the other aristocratic families didn't say a word. They just watched quietly, afraid that they might miss something. Even the cultivators didn't look away. Looking at the two people in the snow below, one sitting and one standing, and feeling the vigilant aura, everyone felt touched. If I break through to the next stage, will there be people protecting me like this? Chen Fei Chen's gaze flickered slightly. He looked at Chu Yang and Jiu Du Xing, who were already covered in snow, and said slowly, "In my life, I hate brothers like this the most. For people like this, it's good to have one friend. The others will naturally acknowledge you, but if you want to kill them for revenge, you must kill them all. If you let any one of them escape, there will be endless trouble in the future. If you kill one of these people, the others will give up all their goals in life. They will spend their lives with revenge as their ultimate goal. This is the scariest," Chen Fei Chen said indifferently. At the side, a bodyguard sighed and said, "The scariest thing isn't the person, but friendship." "Nonsense," Chen Fei Chen said disdainfully. "This is a bunch of one-track-minded idiot." He paused and tilted his head strangely, saying, "Why do I have a premonition that in the future, I will definitely become enemies with these people?" The two bodyguards were stunned. The snow continued to fall, getting heavier and heavier. It was already late at night. Chu Yang and Jiu Du Xing had already completely turned into two snowmen. Even their hair and clothes were not exposed. Chu Yang suddenly felt something. He raised his head slightly. The snow fell for a while. He looked at Jiu Du Xing and closed his eyes again. Just now, he suddenly felt that the place where Jiu Du Xing was originally standing had suddenly lost Jiu Du Xing's aura. It was as if Jiu Du Xing had suddenly disappeared from this world. But at a glance, Jiu Du Xing was clearly still standing there quietly. When he closed his eyes, he felt that there was still an emptiness there. Unity of heaven and man. The white-bearded cultivator's face was solemn. He said seriously in a low voice, as if he was afraid of waking up Jiu Du Xing, who was in this state. But in reality, he was almost 3,000 feet away from Jiu Du Xing. At such a distance, if it was an ordinary person, even if it was not snowing, they would not be able to see anything. After a while, a lonely and desolate aura suddenly spread between heaven and earth. But in this lonely aura, it seemed to be filled with traces of concern, traces of reluctance. It was as if a person who was at the peak of the world was looking at the world in endless loneliness with pity and reluctance. Because there, he was concerned about it. What is going on? This is obviously contradictory. Ling Han Shui's beautiful eyes revealed a puzzled look. Since it is the lonely swordsman, there is Jiu Du Xing. How can he still enter such a lonely state? This was the doubt that everyone had. But although they did not understand, everyone already understood. Everyone was experienced and knowledgeable. How could they not feel that even if there was concern, the lonely swordsman was still the lonely swordsman? So this Jiu Du Xing's sword was still the lonely sword emperor. This was also the sword intent of this sword emperor. Everyone closed their eyes and tried to understand the heavenly Tao of this lonely sword emperor. Even if they could not understand it, they could understand some of the aura and comprehend it. Loneliness filled the air and spread far and wide. When it filled the entire world, it suddenly retracted and disappeared without a trace. "Did you break through?" The white-bearded wielder opened his eyes and sighed regretfully. "I didn't get anything." No. It was not a breakthrough. It was still a breakthrough. Then, he was shocked by what he saw. Another long silence. Jiu Du Xing once again fell into a state of emptiness. It was already 4 o'clock in the morning. Suddenly, a mysterious feeling spread out endlessly. And this time, every expert who tried to understand this state hurriedly retracted their divine senses. Their hearts were filled with lingering fear and shock at the same time, because when they came into contact with this state, they quickly felt that they had forgotten everything. Yes, forgotten. It was as if in such a state, everything in their past had quickly disappeared from their memories, and Jiu Du Xing, who was standing there motionlessly, seemed to be floating at this moment. He had forgotten everything and forgotten everything. He had forgotten this heaven, forgotten this earth, forgotten this world. A sword intent seemed to have been forgotten by the world. It was wandering aimlessly in the sky. Wherever it floated, sword energy would fill the sky. How is this possible? The white-bearded cultivator stood up in shock. How can a sword emperor comprehend two completely different sword intents at the same time? Not only him, The others also opened their eyes in shock. Many people stood up. They did not know that this was the sword intent that Jiyu Duxing had comprehended after the battle with Tu Qianhao. Unruffled emotions. Unruffled emotions, great technique. Now, Jiyu Duxing was in a state that even he could not grasp. But the spiritual power that he had displayed could be regarded as the great technique of unruffled emotions that Tu Qianhao had spent his entire life researching in his previous life. If he could release this kind of concept at will when he was conscious, then he would have reached the point where he would have some achievement. Suddenly, Jiyu Duxing's body trembled slightly. In the snow-covered land, a wisp of melancholy, loneliness, endless desolation, and ethereal silence gently came out, a sword across the sky, towards the peak. Life is saved. Turning around, it is empty. Where is the world? A soulmate is rewarded. When I want to look back, I have already forgotten. The white-bearded cultivator's eyes shone brightly. His hands trembled slightly. His white beard fluttered and trembled as he listened to this poem. Perhaps this was a sword technique. He seemed to have felt Jiyu Duxing's state of mind. As a saint-level expert, he was the only one who was qualified to interpret these 4 lines of Jiyu Duxing's sword technique. But, after he interpreted them, this saint-level expert felt even more depressed. A sword across the sky towards the peak. As a sword emperor, there was nothing else other than the sword. A sword emperor was originally so lonely. This sentence sounded very heroic, but in fact, it was the state of mind of a lonely swordsman. But the next sentence clearly went from the realm of loneliness to the realm of being free and easy like flowing clouds and flowing water, yet at the same time, it was also a realm of frustration. No matter how hard one works, victory or defeat will become nothing in the blink of an eye. This was contradictory to the previous sentence. Since everything became nothing, then what was the point of working hard? So, it became an exploration of life, and a passive one at that. Where is the world's soulmate? This sentence clearly changed. His state of mind had changed 7 to 8 times in these 3 sentences. How could he cultivate to be a sword emperor with such a complicated state of mind? This sentence was obviously filled with disappointment, loneliness, and desolation, but in fact, if one listened carefully, one could tell that this sentence was indeed somewhat proud. And, where is the world's soulmate? It was not that there was no soulmate. When I want to look back, I have already forgotten. This sentence had completely entered the state of forgetfulness. But it was also when I want to look back. Then, why do I have to look back? So, although I have forgotten, I am still me. Concern is still concern. This was a circle from the beginning. After 1 round, it returned to the beginning. But this was already different from the beginning. It had already transcended. The white-bearded cultivator was depressed. He understood it completely, but he could not cultivate at all. Chapter 699. No wonder people say that the realm of a sword sovereign will never be repeated. Every sword intent would only belong to a single person. This person's death will be the end. Even after billions of years, there will never be a repeat. The white-bearded enforcer mumbled, I see. It's really so. It seems like today's battle will be a solo performance by this sword sovereign. No wonder people say that a sword sovereign needs a sacrifice to achieve a breakthrough. And this sacrifice must be a great loss of life. The next moment, Jiyu Duxing let out a clear roar and shook violently from the pile of snow on his left. The pile of snow on his left suddenly exploded and half of his body was exposed. A solitary sword aura was emitted. They rushed up into the boundless snowy sky. It was sharp and powerful. It was brilliant and unparalleled. 3rd-grade sword sovereign. The white-bearded enforcer was shocked. But why is only half of his body exposed? Could it be? Then, there was another explosion. The pile of snow on Jiyu Duxing's right suddenly exploded and his entire body was exposed. A sword will of the emotionless sword also exploded from the right side of his body. The black dragon sword issued a loud and clear sword cry, and suddenly unsheathed itself from the scabbard. It carried a wisp of arrogant disdain, and flew straight up into the sky. It swallowed and spat out sword light in midair, and looked down on the world with disdain. Jiyu Duxing's entire body seemed to have been separated into two halves. One was lonely and the other was emotionless. These two different sword wills were reflected on his body and also separated his body into two halves. However, it was in the same body as him. Unified. Perfect embodiment. He is indeed a sword sovereign with two attributes. The white-bearded enforcer took in a breath of cold air. His eyes suddenly emitted a burning glow. Jiyu Duxing's artistic conception had enveloped Chu Yang from the start till the end. Or rather, Chu Yang had always been at the core of Jiyu Duxing's artistic conception. When Jiyu Duxing felt the depths of the Sword of Solitude, Chu Yang also felt the loneliness that came from the depths of love. Jiyu Duxing's loneliness was not the loneliness of being at the top of the world. It was the loneliness of not having anything else other than his sword. The loneliness of not having anything else other than his emotions. Jiyu Duxing's state of mind was just that stubborn. At the same time of this breakthrough, he opened up his heart completely to his friends. Only by reaching the pinnacle of the sword could one achieve the pinnacle of the sword. Only by being extremely emotional could one be loyal to their feelings. You can forget your feelings. Forgetting one's feelings wasn't about forgetting. Instead, it was about integrating one's feelings into this world, coexisting with heaven and earth. For eternity. This love had a life of its own. Just like Jiyu Duxing's sword, it now had a life of its own. Jiyu Duxing had already broken through to the third stage of Sword Emperor. However, Chu Yang was still sitting there. He was still immersed in the artistic conception of Jiyu Duxing. In such a place of sword intent, he actually couldn't help but think of Mo Qingwu. Then, another scene seemed to appear in his heart. In that instant, his heart ached. His heart was like the sun setting in the mountains, the light fog gradually thickening. It was almost at this moment that Chu Yang lost himself. Purple bamboo forest. Her red clothes were like blood, and the purple bamboo fluttered in the wind. She was peerless in her generation, and her gaze was filled with sorrow. If I dance for you, I won't suffer for the rest of my life. If you watch my dance, I won't be alone in life or death. His red clothes fluttered, dancing for you in this life. Even if he was mercilessly abandoned, he would still dance for you. Even if it was bitter, he wouldn't be bitter. Because he didn't dance lightly, this dance was for a lifetime. Wrapped in the snow, Chu Yang sighed softly, feeling extremely disappointed. In this state of complete solitude, he completely understood Jiyu Duxing's sword intent. However, because of this sword intent, he thought of something else. Jiyu Duxing's sword intent, Jiyu Duxing's feelings, Chu Yang already completely understood. But he only understood, he wouldn't cultivate it. Moreover, after understanding it, he abandoned himself outside of Jiyu Duxing's sword intent. Because this was Jiyu Duxing's sword intent, but Chu Yang had Chu Yang's sword intent. Therefore, it was one thing for Chu Yang to understand it, and another for him to comprehend his own sword intent. Just like how Jiyu Duxing couldn't forget Jiyu Miaoling, but Chu Yang's heart was Mo Qingwu. Jiyu Miaoling and Mo Qingwu were not the same person. It was the same for his sword intent. However, because Jiyu Duxing comprehended his sword of solitude, his sword of oblivion, because of his feelings, this feeling moved Chu Yang's heart. Therefore, he sighed. There was never a moment when he missed Mo Qingwu so urgently and so bitterly, whether it was the Mo Qingwu of the previous life or the Mo Qingwu of this life. Because you danced for me in the previous life, I'm willing to suffer for you in this life. Qingwu, I'm waiting for you. Waiting for you to grow up. White snow drifted down, and Jiyu Duxing's voice came from outside the snow pile. Do you understand? Chu Yang sighed. What about you? Do you understand? Jiyu Duxing smiled. Although Chu Yang was trapped in the snow and couldn't see Jiyu Duxing's smile, he could imagine that Jiyu Duxing's smile must be very blissful. I understand. This time, I've comprehended third stage sword sovereign. This is a very insignificant matter. Jiyu Duxing smiled and said, most importantly, I understand the direction of my life. I practice the sword, be it solitude or oblivion, not to kill people. It's to protect. Protect Sister Xiaomiao, protect my brothers. Protect all the people I care about. Gu Duxing said, since it's to protect, then, when you protect, you must oblivion. Because to protect is to protect. Chu Yang smiled gently. My sword is different from yours, but we both do it to protect. Chu Yang remembered that when he had just been reborn, he once said to his master, Meng Chaoran, practicing the sword is to kill people. But now, Gu Duxing said, practicing the sword is not to kill people. It seemed very contradictory, but now Chu Yang only knew that what he said at that time was wrong. Because at that time, he was still immersed in the martial arts realm of his previous life. Gu Duxing's current realm had completely surpassed his previous realm, including his state of mind. Therefore, Gu Duxing had already formed his own path of martial arts. Gu Duxing gave a carefree smile and said, in the end, it's all about one sentence, martial arts is about protection. Chu Yang pondered for a long time, and finally, he burst out from the snow pile with a bang. He laughed and said, that's right. Actually, this is the reason. The martial arts path is actually because this world is not safe. Ordinary people can't protect their own things, so I want to strengthen myself to protect the things I care about. This is a process. This process forms a pattern, and it becomes the martial arts path. This time, it was Gu Duxing's turn to be stunned. He frowned and said, what are you talking about? Chu Yang laughed and said, that's it, that's it. Chu Yang suddenly became cheerful. He felt that he had never been so cheerful before. He also didn't understand why he suddenly thought of this, why he suddenly thought it through and became cheerful. But from now on, his mood suddenly became better. Chu Yang stood up, laughed twice, and walked into the tent. Facing the crazy eyes of the brothers, he laughed twice and scolded, motherfucker. Everyone was stunned. Gu Duxing stood outside for a long time. He scratched his head and said inexplicably, what did Gu Duxing do to me just now? What is all this nonsense? He thought about it for a long time, but to no avail. He recalled everything he said, and it seemed that he didn't know how to make Chu Yang behave like this. Finally, the more he thought about it, the more incredulous it was. He finally gave up and muttered, with boss. I really can't speak like a normal person. I can't understand it with a normal person's thinking. He's a real weirdo. He shook his head and finally went into the tent. This night, Chu Yang and the rest were so excited that they didn't sleep. On the other hand, Tian Biu Hui was so depressed that he couldn't sleep. The most painful thing in life was to see the enemy that he was going to fight in the morning break through right in front of his eyes. Furthermore, this enemy was the one who had the most destructive power, and the one who could affect the outcome of the battle the most. Of course, this wasn't the saddest thing. The saddest thing was that he could only watch as his enemy broke through, but he couldn't do anything to stop him. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that if he tried to stop him now, he might not succeed. But if he didn't do anything, the enemy would definitely break through. Yet, at this moment, a law enforcement officer appeared and told him, if you dare to stop him, I'll kill you right now. I won't let you wait until the battle tomorrow. I'll kill you. How could Tian Biu Hui not be heartbroken by this? How could he not complain about the unfairness of the heavens? Thus, Tian Biu Hui's heart was frying. Finally, he gathered everyone. The battle between the martial emperors is at daybreak. But at this moment, Gu Duxing broke through. His a sword sovereign. Tian Biu Hui's face darkened. Once he breaks through, it'll be even harder to stop him. Originally, the difference in strength between both parties was very small. If we allow him to unleash his full potential tomorrow, we'll have an 80% chance of losing. In the battle between the martial emperors, we've lost all our martial emperors. If the battle between the martial emperors happens, we'll lose all our martial emperors again. Then, even if we win, what can we do? Tian Biu Hui smiled viciously. In this battle, the elites of the upper three heavens will all be buried. Perhaps, in the end, only one of us will be left, the martial saint from the Shi clan from the upper three heavens. Everyone was silent. Such a thing could really happen. Because the final victor would have to kill all the losers. This was the rule of the battle at the Lake of Despair. The losers couldn't leave the mountain. If all the martial emperors and martial emperors died, only a few old martial emperors and an invited martial saint were left. Then, even if they won, what could they do? What Lord Tian means is. The Zhao and Li clan masters asked at the same time. Kill Jiyu Duxing. Tian Bu Hui's eyes flashed. Our battle can't be like the battle between the martial emperors. We have to gather the strongest martial emperors and kill Jiyu Duxing, who just broke through to the sword sovereign level. Don't let him unleash his sword power. Everyone's faces darkened as they nodded their heads. A sword sovereign was invincible in the upper three heavens when he unleashed his sword power. When Jiyu Duxing was just a grade 1 sword sovereign, he could fight against a grade 1 martial emperor when he unleashed his sword power. Then, how powerful would a grade 3 sword sovereign be? It was obvious. Lord Black Devil, you're the most experienced when it comes to assassinations. What do you think about this? Tian Bu Hui straightened his body and asked seriously. This chapter started at 7:30 p.m. last night. 13 hours had passed. I'm really devastated. I should have just written about the battle. It's so good to write about the battle. I don't have to think about it. I just have to shout a few times and kill a few people, but I've spent 13 hours writing this. Although I've sent it to all of you, I'm still not satisfied. This fucking torment. I've only spent 20 minutes writing about Tian Bu Hui. This means that I've been tormented for 12 hours by the things I've written. Chapter 700. He laughed coldly and said, The Black Devils have assassinated many people before, but we have never killed a sword sovereign. He looked at Tian Bu Hui coldly and said, I can assassinate a saber emperor. I can even assassinate a martial monarch. However, to a sword sovereign who is full of sword energy. Assassinate. Master Tian, do you know what a sword sovereign is? The Black Devil mocked him mercilessly. A sword sovereign is the sharpest in the world. No matter how good an assassin is at concealment, he can only fight a sword sovereign head-on. He will never assassinate. Do you understand? Hearing this, everyone nodded in agreement. The Black Devil was right. Even against a normal supreme martial artist, he could use a sneak attack. As long as he was good at it, he could do something unexpected. However, a sword sovereign, a sword was the sharpest weapon in the world. Due to the sharpness of the sword, a person who cultivated to the sword emperor level was equivalent to turning himself into a sword. How could he launch a sneak attack against a divine sword that was constantly revealing its edge and choosing who to kill at any given moment? Tian Bu Hui said plainly, Lord Black Devil, you have misunderstood me. We can't assassinate in the battle. Therefore, I am talking about assassinate. Assassinate. In other words, there is a way to kill this sword sovereign at the start of the battle, even if we have to pay a price. Hearing this, everyone fell into deep thought. The Black Devil thought for a while and said slowly, if that's the case, it's not impossible for us Black Devils. However, the price we have to pay will be very high. What is it? Tian Bu Hui was excited. He was most worried about the sword sovereign, Jiyu Duxing. The battle of the martial emperors seemed to be at a lower level. However, it was a strong force. Since they had lost the battle of the martial emperors, they couldn't lose the battle of the martial emperors. Lord Black Devil, don't worry. Since the Black Devils have paid the price, the Black Devils will be compensated accordingly in the next 3 days. Tian Bu Hui said seriously. He knew that the Black Devil was prejudiced against him. Therefore, he swore an oath. The Black Devil snorted and said after a while, the Black Devils have 5 gold-ranked assassins and 3 jade token assassins. We need to use these forces to attack together. I will fight the sword sovereign, Jiyu Duxing, head-on. Then the others will take the opportunity to attack. However, I am already a martial monarch. One of the 3 supreme jade tokens is also a martial monarch. The Black Demon frowned and said, how can I fight in the battle of martial emperors? That's a problem. Tian Bu Hui frowned. This was indeed a problem. If there were no enforcers around, this would be possible. However, the law enforcement officers were present. How could he hide this from them? Once he was discovered. Wouldn't that be? Unless, of course, he'll be demoted to the emperor level. This way, your cultivation will be greatly damaged, but your mind will still be at the monarch level. If you fight against an emperor-level expert like this, you will still be able to say something even if you are discovered, the Black Devil coldly said, but who would be willing to lower their own level after reaching the monarch level? Everyone's eyes lit up. He frowned deeply again. That's right, a monarch-level expert. Who would dare to lower his rank? And it was before the final battle. Tian Bu Hui furrowed his brows and tried to think of a solution. Unless, Black Demon said, unless you have the bone-gnawing heart-burning grass and the 7 wonders Ling Long flower. With the two of them working together, he could consume them immediately after the battle to recover his strength. Other than that, it's impossible for me to make such a sacrifice. Instantly, everyone looked at Tian Bu Hui with sparkling eyes. Everyone knew that the bone-gnawing heart-burning grass and the 7 wonders Ling Long flower were the most precious treasures of the Tian clan. Furthermore, they were also heavenly treasures with miraculous effect. The Black Devil said plainly, if there's such a guarantee, I can use all my strength in this battle. Then, I'll split into teams and scatter among the emperors. I'll take advantage of the chaos to kill Jiyu Duxing. Furthermore, Quan has already found the best place to ambush. The battle between the emperors is also the time for him to show his prowess. As long as Jiyu Duxing dies, the battle between the emperors will be won, the Black Devil said plainly. Of course, there's also a risk. For example, whether the bone-gnawing heart-burning grass and the 7 wonders Ling Long flower are really as the rumors say. That's something we can't be sure of. Of course, if you don't agree, just pretend that I didn't say anything. Tian Bu Hui was instantly pushed to the edge of the fire. He had not foreseen that the matter would come back to him so violently when he had brought it up. The bone-gnawing heart-burning grass and the 7 wonders Ling Long flower had been preserved by the Tian clan for 1,500 years. Moreover, they had spent a lot of effort to cultivate them to maturity. This war was related to the future generations. Therefore, Tian Bu Hui had brought them along. However, how could he bear to give away such precious treasures? However, if he didn't agree now, Tian Bu Hui didn't even dare to think about the consequences if they failed. After thinking for a long time, Tian Bu Hui finally gritted his teeth and said, since Lord Black Devil is so confident, the Tian clan will contribute the bone-gnawing heart-burning grass and the 7 wonders Ling Long flower. What's wrong with that? Lord Tian is indeed righteous, the Black Devil said sarcastically. But how can I trust you? Tian Bu Hui's eyes were red. As long as you give me the medicine, I'll immediately destroy my martial monarch-level cultivation right here, the Black Devil said viciously. All right. The two of them raised their hands and clapped. The onlookers were impressed. The Black Devil was indeed the most ruthless person in the 3 heavens. He was willing to pay such a price to kill Jiyu Duxing. Tian Bu Hui's heart was bleeding, but he still had to smile. After a while, the medicine was brought over. As expected, the Black Demon crippled his martial monarch cultivation in front of everyone. He spat out a few mouthfuls of blood and gasped for breath. It took him a while to regain his breath. A martial monarch came forward to check his pulse and nodded at Tian Bu Hui. Tian Bu Hui was delighted. The Black Devil had already fallen to the martial emperor level. Lord Black Devil, thank you for your hard work. Tian Bu Hui bowed deeply. He thought to himself, after you kill Jiyu Duxing, you won't have the chance to use any treasures. I'll kill you immediately. Won't that be enough? The Black Devil panted for a while and said, don't forget about tomorrow's arrangement. Don't gather the people of the Black Devil clan together. That would be a waste of treasures and a waste of sacrifices. Then, he paused. He said, there's no need to divide the battle between martial emperors into several rounds. Let's just do it like the battle between martial kings. Chaos is the key to victory. Everyone understood that an assassin's killing move was to take advantage of the chaos. If there were fewer people, they wouldn't be able to hide themselves. How could they assassinate? They might as well call it a duel, Tian Bu Hui said sincerely this time, that's for sure. The Black Devil kept the bone-gnawing heart-burning grass and the 7 wonders Ling Long flower. Goodbye. He walked out of the door. Let's arrange for tomorrow's arrangement. Tian Bu Hui's eyes flashed with a sinister light. We can only win tomorrow's battle. We can't lose. The sky was just starting to brighten. However, a strange scene appeared beside the lake of despair. Snowflakes were still floating in the sky, and the sunlight illuminated the horizon. It was snowing on one side of the lake. Furthermore, the hot steam from the lake of despair rose. When it came into contact with the sunlight and the snowflakes, it strangely turned into a colorful and magnificent sight. Looking at it, it was like a dream. Suddenly, an empty castle seemed to have appeared between the two supreme martial artist steles. Inside, there were countless pavilions and buildings. Colorful lights flashed and blurred. In this empty castle, there were people coming and going. There were white-robed immortals. They floated around gracefully. It was like a celestial palace in the heavens. Regardless of whether it was the two parties, the big clans or the enforcers, they were all dazzled. They looked on as if they were in a dream. When the sun rose, this scene slowly disappeared. Everyone seemed to have woken up from a dream. They were still reminiscing about it. Chu Yang was stunned. He was confused. These empty pavilions, why do they look so real? Although it was many times smaller than the real world, but there was no need to doubt the quality of the existence of each and every one of the characters. Chu Yang didn't believe that this was an illusion. This was especially so when the two supreme martial artists were confronting each other. Could it really be fake? If it was real, then, where is this place? Just as everyone was confused, the white-bearded enforcer coughed and said, "The battle between the martial emperors begins today." Before he finished speaking, Tian Biu Hui said, "Enforcer, I have a request. Can the battle between the martial emperors be decided in one battle?" The white-bearded enforcer was stunned. He frowned. He was a little unhappy. If that's the case, why did they set the rules in advance? Why don't they all fight at the same time? Once one party dies, it'll be over. The battle between the martial kings was changed once. Now, the battle between the martial emperors is changed again. Is there an end to this? He suppressed his anger and said, "We have to ask the other party." Mo Tianji smiled and said, "Since Brother Tian has such an interest, we have to accompany you. We have to do it even if we can't." The white-bearded enforcer was depressed. "Since that's the case, let's start the battle." After he finished speaking, he snorted and sat down on the stage. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and said, "Since that's the case, let's also decide the battle between the martial emperors." He had made a decision. Tian Biu Hui was elated and said, "Yes." He waved his hand, and the martial emperors behind him walked out. Chu Yang, Jiyu Duxing, and the rest stood together and watched. Black and white robes of different colors were mixed together messily. It wasn't like the battle between the martial kings, where the clans formed a team. On the other side, under Jiyu Duxing's lead, the 10 martial emperors also walked out slowly. There were a total of 134 martial emperors in the opposing camp. More than 30 of them looked arrogant and disdainful. It was as if they were afraid that others didn't know that they were from the Shu clan of the upper three heavens. Both parties faced each other. They were 300 feet apart and stood quietly. Jiyu Duxing stood at the front and whistled. He said sadly, "I didn't expect that I, Jiyu Duxing, would be able to participate in the battle between the martial emperors today. Life is like a dream, nothing more than this." Chu Yang was also a little emotional. When he met Jiyu Duxing 2 years ago, he was only a small martial ancestor. Now, he was representing the various clans and leading hundreds of martial emperors. Furthermore, the clan leaders of the various clans were also under his control. No one was dissatisfied. Jiyu Duxing sighed. However, the light in his eyes became brighter and brighter. Finally, they turned into 2 streaks of sword radiance. He said coldly, "The earlier you die, the earlier you can reincarnate. Come." Chapter 701. Both sides slowly moved towards each other, their auras heavy and heavy. It was very different from the opening of the Battle of the Martial Kings. If not for the heavy killing intent on everyone's faces, one would almost think that this was a group of friends who had arranged to meet here. Mo Lei clutched Dong Wushang's arm tightly, her eyes fixed on the arena. She didn't even blink as her breathing quickened. Dong Wushang looked at her strangely. What's wrong with this girl? Hadn't she always been bold and daring? Why was she so nervous today? Dong Wushang still felt a little uncomfortable with a young lady hugging his arm in public. After struggling for a while, he saw that Mo Lei was hugging him tightly, as if she didn't feel anything at all. He couldn't bear it and stopped struggling. He slowly reached out and touched the back of Mo Lei's hand, holding it comfortingly. Before Mo Lei could say anything, Dong Wushang had already retracted his hand with a red face, his heart beating twice as fast. This kind of action was very easy for any man, but when Dong Wushang did it, the meaning was completely different. God knew how much courage he had to muster to be able to hold a young lady's hand in public. Mo Lei looked at the back of her hand in a daze, as if Dong Wushang's warmth still lingered on it. She couldn't help but feel warm and calm. She quietly raised her eyes and looked at Dong Wushang, only to see that his shoulders were broad and his back was thick, as if he had already held up a solid sky for her, completely covering her from all the wind and rain between heaven and earth. Instantly, she seemed to have someone to rely on and was no longer so afraid. She couldn't help but gently lean on his chest. At this moment, her heart was calm. There was no more panic or worry. There was only her blessing for her father. It can do it. It can definitely do it. There was a long and sinister laugh, and the black demon, who was among the crowd of martial emperors, shouted hoarsely, "Kill." At the same time, a lonely sword intent suddenly filled the sky without warning. The wind, snow, and wind in mid-air actually let out a loud clang at this moment. Everyone present was shocked. From martial monarchs and below, everyone's swords were automatically unsheathed at the same time, shining with a cold light. One sword was above the wind and clouds of heaven and earth. The sword Qi of the unique and righteous suddenly appeared in the air. The moment it appeared, it was like a sovereign descending upon the world. The sword light flashed. It streaked across the blue dome of heaven and earth in a lonely and forlorn manner. Then, a fifth-grade emperor-level expert on the opposite side was quietly cut into two pieces with a shua sound. He was taking a step forward. Then, his upper body slowly fell to the ground. 2 feet. However, it was as if they had taken root in the snow. He didn't even have time to let out a scream before he was dead. In fact, the domain of the martial emperor hadn't even had the time to rise. Immediately after, a black-clothed figure appeared, exuding an awe-inspiring loneliness. He appeared in front of the enemy camp. Jiyu Duxing was expressionless. His face was like ice, his eyes were like black ice, his body was like ice, and his sword was like an ice dragon. In this vast world of ice and snow, he came flying. The black dragon's sword let out a sharp sword cry. He wanted to move unhindered and wreak havoc everywhere. This was the moment. Tian Bu Hui shouted in his heart, "Good chance." Jiyu Duxing had already gone into battle alone. All the martial emperor's eyes flashed fiercely. They all saw the sword sovereign who had appeared in the name of the killing god and was looking for sacrifices. There was fear, and murderous intent. "Good chance." The black devil shouted, "Kill." Tian Bu Hui excitedly slapped his big chest, making a loud sound. However, Tian Bu Hui's mouth suddenly opened wide. He looked at the scene in disbelief. It was as if he had been completely frozen. He didn't move at all. How is this possible? After a long while, he trembled violently. His face suddenly turned red. He cried out, "Black devil! Black devil! I'm going to kill you. 8 generations of your ancestors. You despicable traitor." Boo-hoo. Behind him, everyone was dumbfounded. Even the martial sage from the Shi clan from the upper 3 heavens opened his eyes and mouth in disbelief. This was too unbelievable. In the field, the Black Devil gave the order. All the Black Devil assassins, including the remaining 17 martial emperors, attacked at the same time. The sword light was sharp and the angle was tricky. It killed people like cutting vegetables. Furthermore, wherever the sword light went, it was invincible. There was no one who could withstand the sword light. Heads rolled, blood splattered, and limbs splattered everywhere. It was a hellish scene. This was a textbook example of an assassination, accurate, sharp, killing in one strike. Everyone who saw this scene understood why the Black Devil was able to dominate the upper three heavens. How could he be able to dominate the upper three heavens as an assassin, who was almost a sacrificial warrior? This kind of assassination method was really elusive. Killing the first batch of people was nothing. They were caught off guard. However, killing the second batch was a demonstration of their strength. They flashed around like ghosts. Their swords flashed. They used the dead bodies to hide themselves. They attacked from all directions. They attacked from all sorts of angles. They attacked from all directions. Killing. One of the Hey-Mo assassins was clearly charging forward. Everyone thought he was going to rush forward and kill them, but he instantly retreated with the tip of his sword pointing backwards. Everyone thought he was going to catch the people behind him off guard, but his sword came out from under his ribs and pierced the throat of the person on the left. He was holding the sword with his right hand. This sword move was to use one's arm to form a circle around oneself. Then, from the strangest angle, it was to kill someone. There was another person whose sword was broken. He retreated hurriedly. However, his leg flew up. A complete sword suddenly shot out from his leg and pierced the heart of the enemy who was chasing after him. There were still a few Black Devil assassins who were moving. However, they suddenly gathered from all directions. A few swords pierced the body of the enemy furthest away at the same time. The Black Devil was like a fish in water. With a flash of his sword, 2 people beside him were cut into 4 pieces. Then, he pulled his sword out from the mouths of the enemies on his right. The sword on his side was still glowing with blood. A black dagger suddenly appeared in his left hand. It was dim, but it stabbed into the throat of an Emperor-level expert on his left. His left hand was counterattacked. He retracted it. The dagger and sword flew out of his hand at the same time. They flew to the back of the group like shooting stars. They killed 2 Emperor-level experts who were still in shock. 4 to 5 enemies attacked at the same time. The Black Devil was unarmed. Suddenly, he leaned back. His hands and feet touched the ground at the same time. 4 to 5 people sneered and rushed over angrily. Suddenly, there was a bang from the Black Devil's mouth. Countless needles as thin as cow's hair shot out. They hit the faces of these Emperor-level experts. Suddenly, the 4 to 5 people screamed at the same time. They covered their faces and rolled back. Their faces were numb. Their eyes were bloodshot. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that these people's eyes were already damaged. However, they did not roll back. The Black Devil who was on the ground had already circled around. A long sword appeared in his hands and feet. He spun on the ground like a praying mat. Puff, puff, puff. His 8 legs were left there. Then, he suddenly stood up. The enemies around him roared and surrounded him. However, they were met with a ball of black fog from his body. The sword light of the black fog flashed. Then, screams sounded again. The Black Devil's assassination no longer cared about cultivation level. Those who were in his assassination range would die without a doubt. However, this scene stunned everyone on both sides. Because they were killed. They were not killed by Chu Yang's people. They were killed by their own people. In other words, the people they killed were people from the Tian clan, Zhao clan, Li clan, and Li clan. The Tu clan, and even the reinforcements from the upper 3 heavens. The only people they did not kill were Chu Yang's people. The black waves formed a tidal wave. No, it should be a blood wave. Jiyu Duxing only killed 1 person. Then, there was a change in the situation. The other side started fighting fiercely. If not for Chu Yang's reminder, Jiyu Duxing would have been stunned. But with this reminder in front of him, Jiyu Duxing remained as calm as ice at this moment. He raised his sword, kill, striking while the iron was hot. He rushed into the enemy group like a whirlwind. The 15 Emperor-level experts behind him rushed in with a loud bang. Tian Biyu Hui's body was cold. It was as if he had fallen into an ice cave. His mind was in a mess. He could not understand why the Black Devil would betray him. Why? The Black Devil had enmity with the Dawn clan, Luo clan, Ji clan, Jiyu clan, and King of Hell Chu. They could not live under the same sky as the Mo clan. They were supposed to be the most reliable and the most solid allies. They actually betrayed him at this moment. Even if the Li clan suddenly surrendered, or the two clans suddenly knelt down to the enemy, or even if the heavens collapsed in front of Tianbiyu Hui, he would not be as shocked as he was now. Because there was no reason for this. Everyone could betray him, but not the Black Devil. Tianbiyu Hui even felt that even if he cooperated with Mo Tianji, this was possible. But the Black Devil. But now, the Black Devil had betrayed him. Where could he find a reason for this? There were a total of 137 Emperor-level experts. But 17 Black Devil assassins suddenly turned on them. They stood there like melons, and chopped down 43 Emperor-level experts at lightning speed. More than 10 people died in the hands of the Black Devil alone. After this round of brutal assassination, everyone finally regained their senses. They fought desperately with the Black Devil assassins. As for the Emperor-level experts on Jiyu Duxing's side, not many of them faced the enemy. The most hated thing in the martial world was to be stabbed in the back by one's allies in a battle of life and death. This was the biggest taboo in the entire heavens. The Black Devil had committed the biggest taboo in the martial world. Why? Black Devil. Why? Tianbiyu Hui stood up suddenly and asked sternly. As soon as he spoke, he spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. The Black Devil was now in a tight encirclement. Everyone did not care about their own safety. Their eyes were red as they fought with all their might. The Black Devil did not make a sound. His hair was disheveled, but his eyes were still cold. His black robe was still cold. Terrifying. Screams filled the air. Almost at the same time, 2 Black Devil assassins were chopped into meat paste by the Emperor-level expert. They slashed the ground with all their might. They did not care about anything else. In fact, even though Jiyu Duxing was leading the Emperor-level experts to kill them from behind, they still didn't care. They didn't block or block. Even if they had to pay with their lives, they just wanted to stab the Hei Mo assassins with their sword. Their hatred for the Black Devil had reached a point where it could not be resolved in their lifetime. If they died today, they would not be able to rest in peace. Jiyu Duxing let out a long howl and slashed an Emperor-level expert who was besieging an assassin of the Hei Mo clan into 2 halves. However, the upper half of the Emperor-level expert's body still flew out with all his might. Even though the lower half of his body had already been separated, he still pounced forward ferociously and bit the shoulder of the Hei Mo clan assassin. He was already dead, and his internal organs were flowing out of his broken body. However, his eyes were still wide open in anger. The Hei Mo assassin desperately slashed at his corpse with his sword and palm, turning his body into pieces. However, his teeth were still tightly bitten into the assassin's shoulder, sinking deep into it. Even when the Black Devil assassin was chopped into meat paste, his head was still cut open by someone. His teeth were still inside. This showed how deep his hatred was. Kill the Black Devil first. Tianbiyu Hui shouted angrily. Kill them. No matter the cost. We have to kill him. This be asterisk starred. This be asterisk starred. This be asterisk starred. Tianbiyu Hui shouted in despair. Black Devil. Your 18 generations of ancestors. They had already lost this battle. Everyone could see that. However, no one expected them to lose like this. The battle was even more tragic. All the enemy experts did not care about anything else. Other than attacking the Black Devil, they did not do anything else. When they saw Jiyu Duxing and the rest, they tried their best to hide. If they could not hide, they tried their best to attack the Black Devil. The Black Devil's cultivation level had just dropped. He had lost his advantage in assassination and was in imminent danger. However, he gritted his teeth and fought with all his might. Even when he was surrounded by enemies, he did not retreat a single step. His body was already injured. Jiyu Duxing charged forward crazily. However, under the desperate attacks of the enemy, he could not break through. Suddenly, the Black Devil jumped up, covered in blood. His sword flashed and he slashed down again. A human head flew into the air, dripping with blood. However, a deep wound appeared on the black demon's body. He suddenly screamed. His voice was still clear on the chaotic battlefield. Everyone could hear it. This voice was still hoarse and sinister. It was still calm. However, It was filled with an indescribable feeling. Dong Wushang. Mo Lei is my daughter. Don't let my daughter down. The Black Devil screamed. Don't let my daughter down. What I owe your Dong clan, can I repay in this battle? The Black Devil screamed. Don't vent your anger on my daughter. Don't bully my Lei. Mo Tianji. What I owe your Mo clan, I'll repay in this battle. My daughter will be your sister-in-law in the future. Don't bully her. The black demon roared loudly. His flesh and blood splattered everywhere, and blood spurted out. King of Hell Chu, I'll hand my daughter over to your brothers. The Black Devil screamed and spat out a mouthful of blood. Are you going to stop them? For the sake of this old man's battle today, fulfill their wishes. Fulfill my daughter's wishes. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere. The Black Devil screamed crazily, I owe Chong Tian. I've repaid everything. I've repaid everything. Lei, don't cry. Remember your mother's words. I'll be with your mother. Don't worry about us. Dong Wushang. Don't let my daughter down. Don't let my daughter down. Chapter 702. Cries of agony reverberated through the skies. Dong Wushang felt as if he was struck by lightning. He turned around abruptly and looked at Mo Lei beside him. Mo Lei's red lips were wide open. Her eyes were filled with disbelief. Endless regret, sorrow, and despair appeared in her eyes at the same time. She had never thought that her father would use such a decisive method to fight for her happiness. She stood there in a daze. She only felt that her mind was blank. What kind of love was so expensive? It needed to be exchanged for by sacrificing her own father. Even if this was exchanged for happiness, was this still happiness? I know that the Black Devils are already at their wits' end. The Zhao and Li clans have already become the vassals of the Tian clan. Tu Qian Hao is already dead, but the Tu clan has reinforcements from the upper three heavens. Li Xiongtu's clan has the support of the upper three heavens. The only clan that has no backing and is slightly weaker is the Black Devils. And in this battle, they were even sent as the main force. Tian Biyu Hui's intention was not simply to destroy the clans of Dong Wushang, Mo Tianji, and the rest. He also wanted to wear down the Black Devils. Whether the Black Devils fought or not, only death awaited them. There was no way forward and no way back. Since death awaited either way, why not use my death to fulfill my daughter's wish? This should be her father's entire mindset. So he thought this way and did this. Mo Lei trembled all over. But I can't accept this. Although I know that it's a dead end, I still can't accept that my father died for me. If I had known earlier, I would have rather destroyed my clan and my father together. Father, you've been a tyrant all your life. You've never cared about other people's thoughts and feelings. At this moment, you're still so stubborn. You're still so domineering for once. But, what about me? How do I have the face to continue living in this world? How do I have the face to accept the happiness that you exchanged for with your life? Mo Lei took a step forward. Her face suddenly turned as white as snow. Then, it turned red like a raging fire. Then, she suddenly cried out and spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. Her body trembled and her lips moved as if she wanted to say something. But when she opened her mouth, it turned into a weak moan. Then, another mouthful of blood quietly slid out of her lips. In the next moment, she silently fell to the ground. He fainted. Dong Wushang subconsciously hugged her. His heart was in a mess for a moment. He finally knew who she was, young Black Devil. But now, he really couldn't remember anything about the terrifying legend of the Black Demon. He only knew that the person in his arms was a woman. This was a woman who needed his care, protection, and comfort. The battlefield was even more tragic. The Black Demon's mask had already fallen off, revealing a skinny face. His face was cold and expressionless. The expression in his eyes was still dark, cold, and calm. His body was already covered with wounds. But he didn't even frown. Black Demon. Tell me why. Tian Biyu Hui's desperate and furious voice could be heard. Why? The Black Demon muttered to himself. Then, he suddenly laughed towards the sky. Although his laughter was still dark, it was a joyous laughter. Tien Biu Hui, hey Mo, have two choices. The black demon laughed as he continued to move around. Firstly, my daughter, my family, and I will all sacrifice ourselves for you, Tien Biu Hui. The second choice is to sacrifice myself for my daughter's happiness. Furthermore, I can protect my daughter. The black demon was very happy. He even laughed slyly. Tien Biu Hui, why do you think I'm doing this? Tien Biu Hui was so angry that his body trembled. He shouted, if you don't do this, you can still protect your family and your daughter. Bullshit. The black demon cursed. Another blade was stabbed in his body. He shouted coldly and stabbed his sword into the chest of a martial emperor. Tien Biu Hui, you have already acknowledged Shi Chang Feng as your godfather. Do you think I don't know? Do you think I don't know that you have already formulated a plan to destroy the black demon? The black demon isn't good at killing people. He's good at concealing himself. Ha ha ha, when you and Shi Chang Feng were formulating this plan, did you think that I would be right above your heads? Although I am an assassin, how can a despicable person like you be worthy of me sacrificing myself for you? The black demon stood up. His skinny body was covered in blood. He laughed towards the sky. You're not worthy. You're not worthy. Tien Biu Hui's handsome face became twisted. Kill him. Kill him. Kill him. Kill him. The scene was already extremely chaotic. There were less than 40 people left on Tien Biu Hui's side. On the other hand, there were only 2 people left from the Black Demon clan. This included the Black Demon himself and the Supreme Assassin who had just fallen from the Martial Monarch level. Jiu Du Xing's sword was like the wind, rain, and fog. He fought his way in. However, these martial emperors seemed to have lost their minds. They didn't care about him at all. They risked their lives just to hit the Black Demon, kick him, stab him, slash him, and even bite him. One of them flew towards the Black Demon on his sword. Jiu Du Xing intercepted him in midair. With a slash of his sword, this person was sliced into 2. However, his upper body still carried a bright sword radiance. He rushed into the Black Demon's battle circle and attacked. You have your difficulties, but we have our worries too. You don't want to sacrifice yourself for Tien Biu Hui, but do we deserve to die because of your betrayal? With a loud boom, the Black Demon groaned. He lifted his head and spat out a mouthful of blood. A few streaks of sword radiance had already arrived in front of him. He screamed in pain. The Supreme Elder of the Black Demon clan looked at the 2 swords that had already pierced his chest with a ferocious expression. He laughed and shouted, Lei, listen to your father. Then, he used his 2 hands to grab the swords that had pierced his heart. With a snap, the swords of the 2 martial emperors were broken. They couldn't help but rush forward. This Supreme Assassin laughed sinisterly. He pulled out the 2 broken swords that had pierced his heart and said coldly, Come with me. With 2 slashes, the tip of the swords that carried the blood of his heart pierced the chests of the 2 martial emperors. The 3 of them screamed at the same time. They used the last of their strength to stab and slash each other with their broken swords. When they fell to the ground at the same time, they had already turned into 3 piles of minced meat. On the other side, the Black Demon's flesh and blood were flying everywhere. He was in imminent danger. Mo Leia had just woken up. When she saw this scene, she screamed in pain and fainted again. She was still in a coma. Blood kept coming out of her mouth. Dong Wushong's clothes were dyed red. Blood dripped onto the ground. Jiu Du Xing. Chu Yang let out a long howl and shouted, The Black Devil can't die. Get him out of there for me. Even if he wants to die, he can't die now. Chu Yang's heart was burning. He ordered repeatedly, Don't save him. Mo Tianji wanted to stop Chu Yang from speaking, but it was too late. He couldn't help but sigh. Jiu Du Xing let out a long cry. Suddenly, the lonely sword intent filled the sky again. At the same time, the world became hazy. It was as if everyone had forgotten something. Sword intent of oblivion. Jiu Du Xing, the sword sovereign with 2 talents, used his true trump card for the first time in his life. Sword of Solitude, Sword of Oblivion. They were displayed on one of his swords at the same time. He was cold, lonely, oblivion, lonely, and ethereal. However, he was as fast as lightning. Using a posture as if he was sleepwalking, he killed his way in from an unbelievable angle. Slash, 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 slash. The four martial emperors put up their protective domains to support the attacks from the outside. They only attacked the black demon crazily. However, Jiyu Duxing's black dragon sword seemed to ignore the domains. It pierced through their bodies one by one. Then, it kept going in. The four martial emperors only felt a chill in their hearts. They were awakened by the sword. Just as they were about to go all out, a lonely sword intent suddenly exploded in their hearts. Their internal organs were shattered at the same time. However, they still had a trace of rationality left. They wanted to go all out, but the sword intent of oblivion had already filled their minds. It was as if at this moment, they were suddenly muddled and forgotten. Then, before they could do anything, they fell down in despair. Jiyu Duxing's black clothes were completely soaked in blood the moment he attacked. His sword was like the wind. Without stopping, he killed one person and entered the innermost part of the encirclement. Outside, dozens of martial emperors launched their strongest attacks at the same time to support Jiyu Duxing. At this moment, the black demon was already at the end of his rope. With a loud cry, his left hand was chopped off from his shoulder by a sword. The black demon's body trembled. 3 swords stabbed towards his forehead, heart, and throat at the same time. The black demon no longer had any strength to block, parry, or dodge. But right at this moment, Jiyu Duxing's solitary and emotionless sword intent suddenly filled up the battlefield. The sword light flew up like a dream. When the 3 swords reached their targets, they were inexplicably broken. Then, Jiyu Duxing's sword turned into a bolt of lightning. Poof, poof, poof. 3 heads jumped up in the air. Jiyu Duxing's free left hand had already grabbed the black demon's belt. When he grabbed it, the belt broke. The black demon's clothes were already torn. Jiyu Duxing frowned. He continued to attack with his sword. His hand grabbed the black demon's right shoulder again. With a long roar, the sword light turned into a round pillar of light. It was bright and resplendent. Jiyu Duxing held his sword in one hand and the black demon in the other. He was like a lonely dragon as he soared into the sky. Kill him! Kill him! Kill him! Tian Biyu Hui jumped up and down as he shouted crazily. However, he could no longer do so. There were less than 20 martial emperors left. They were surrounded by more than 80 martial emperors. Their swords and sabers came down on them. The saber light was like a waterfall, and the sword light was like rain. There were continuous screams. The last 3 martial emperors stood upright. They looked in the direction where Jiyu Duxing had left with the black demon. Their faces were filled with unwillingness. The martial emperors slashed at them with their swords and sabers. However, they were not met with any resistance. Only then did they know that the 3 martial emperors had already stopped breathing. Chapter 703. Why not? Chu Yang turned and looked at Mo Tianji. Why should I save him? Mo Tianji frowned. If I wanted to save him, Jiyu Duxing could have saved him from the start without any harm. Mo Tianji said angrily, I wanted to use this opportunity to expose Tian Biyu Hui's scheme and deal with the Shi clan of the upper 3 heavens. I wanted to leave a bad impression on the Shi clan and make it easier for us to do things in the future. Now that the Black Devil isn't dead, the depressed and indignant atmosphere isn't there. Without this atmosphere, the effect will be greatly reduced. Furthermore, it's hard to feel hatred and unfairness. Mo Tianji frowned. Why are you so rash? The Black Devil died a worthy death. He died with a clear conscience. If you let him live, there will be more variables. Chu Yang fixed his eyes on Jiyu Duxing. He finally understood why Jiyu Duxing wasn't very enthusiastic at the beginning. This was the reason. Because Mo Tianji had predicted this beforehand, he had arranged for Jiyu Duxing in advance. However, how could Mo Tianji's position in Jiyu Duxing's heart be compared to Chu Yang's? Hence, although Mo Tianji had arranged it, Chu Yang's shout made Jiyu Duxing give up on his original plan. He saved the Black Devil. This was another kind of confrontation. Intelligence and humanity. This was actually a confrontation between Chu Yang and Mo Tianji. Mo Tianji didn't care about the process. He only wanted the results. This was the biggest difference between him and Chu Yang. After a long while, Chu Yang let out a deep breath. He then said in a deep voice, "Tianji, I understand your plan. I can also predict what you will do next, and what you will say. I also know that your actions will help us achieve twice the results with half the effort in our quest for the upper three heavens in the future. At the very least, if we follow your plan, the She clan will be in big trouble. And the She clan is one of the dominant clans. If I intervene, I will be completely obstructing your plan. It will give us more resistance in the future that we can avoid and make use of. But I can't just watch the Black Devil die. Tianji, I want the Black Devil to die more than you." Chu Yang looked at Mo Tianji sincerely. Mo Tianji calmed down. He sighed deeply and said, "I understand. Yes, Heimo can't die now. As an enemy, he is a cunning enemy, but he deserves our respect." "Why?" "Because he was an assassin hidden in the darkness. If he doesn't launch sneak attacks, is he still the Black Devil? Secondly, as a father, he is a qualified father. As a father, he deserves respect and admiration. However, this is not enough for me to ask Jiyu Duxing to save him. After all, there are countless blood debts in his hand. Indeed, only death can wash them clean and pay them back." Chu Yang slowly paced back and forth and said, "I let Jiyu Duxing save him because of Wu Shong. If the Black Demon dies, what will happen to Mo Lei? What would happen to Dong Wushang? If the blissful Black Demon died just like that, this old bastard would feel that he had done a good job. He would be smiling with all his heart. However, he had fought for his daughter's happiness. What kind of happiness was that? It's more like lifelong torture. If Mo Lei is tortured for life, doesn't that mean Wu Shong is tortured for life? This is a matter for Wu Shong's generation. We can't look at it from the perspective of benefit." Chu Yang said, "Sometimes, we have to consider humanity and people." Mo Tianji was silent. On one hand, he didn't dare to disagree with Chu Yang's words. On the other hand, he knew that Chu Yang was right. The two of them were silent for a long time. Then, Chu Yang said in a low voice, "Tianji, if you were the one who encountered this and not Wu Shong, everyone would make the same choice as me. I don't need to say this. You should be able to guess it yourself." Mo Tianji's body shook and he raised his head. "I have complete confidence in your wisdom. I have full confidence in your planning. I also value your scheming." Chu Yang paced 2 steps and said, "But Lu has one request for you. It's the only request I have for you. That is, when you come up with any plans in the future, start with the premise of don't hurt your own people. We can't afford to lose any one of them. If all of you die and I'm the only one left, it would be a waste of effort. There's no meaning. A man's achievement needs someone to share it with. It needs someone to acknowledge it and even purely enjoy it. If I succeed, only I will know. Only I will be happy. What's the point? If one day, you reach the peak of the heavenly layer, but Jiyu Duxing, Dong Wushong, and I are all small. We are all dead. How does it feel for you, Mo Tianji, to stand at the highest point? Have you thought about it?" Chu Yang said seriously. After that, he didn't say anything else. Because Jiyu Duxing had already rushed over with the Black Demon in his arms. On the battlefield, the outcome was already decided. Chu Yang hurriedly went forward. Mo Tianji stood quietly in the snow and didn't move. He murmured softly, "Everything has to be done from the perspective of don't hurt your own people. We can't afford to lose any one of them. A man's achievement needs someone to share it with." After a long while, Mo Tianji smiled and muttered to himself, "I originally thought that I was the one who was right. Now, it seems that I'm still right. It's just that I need to adjust my perspective. Sigh, it should be the premise that I need to rest." Then, he shook his head and shook off the snow on his head. He muttered, "Chu Yang is cursing me. What does he mean by he, Jiyu Duxing, Dong Wushong, and Xiao Wu are all dead? What kind of bullshit was this? Bah! This bastard doesn't have good intentions." He spat twice and turned around to stride back. "How is it? Chu Yang asked. 5 viscera ruptured, serious injuries. Palm strikes on the head, 2 swords on the back, 7 swords on the front. This is bone deep. Jiyu Duxing's face was a little grim. His left arm and shoulder are gone. One of his ribs is broken. His left thigh is broken. Half of his right leg is chopped off. One of his ears is gone. His cultivation is all gone. As for other minor injuries, there are countless. Chu Yang sucked in a breath of cold air. Quickly carry her into the tent. Chu Yang waved his hand and led the way. Jiyu Duxing followed behind. Dong Wushong carried the unconscious Mo Lei and was about to follow in. However, a figure flashed in front of him and Mo Tianji was already standing in front of him. Dong Wushong looked at Mo Tianji in confusion. Mo Tianji looked at him apologetically and suddenly bowed deeply. Wushong, I'm sorry. Dong Wushong was puzzled. Sorry? Yes, I'm sorry. Mo Tianji straightened up. Jiyu Duxing could have saved her, but I didn't let him do it. Otherwise, the Black Devil wouldn't have been so injured. This is my fault. Dong Wushong was relieved and smiled. You're apologizing to me? He laughed. Is there a need to apologize between you and me? Mo Tianji relaxed and patted Dong Wushong's shoulder. The two of them walked in together. Before walking in, Mo Tianji looked at Mo Lei and sighed. In the past, I wouldn't have felt guilty. Mo Tianji thought to himself. Chu Yang had already fed the Black Devil an incomplete version of the heavy pill. His injuries are too serious. Especially his shoulder, where there's such a big hole. I can even see his internal organs. With such serious injuries, the medicine can't heal him at all. Now, we can only save his life. As for his recovery, we'll have to wait until he wakes up. Chu Yang's face was very serious as he looked at Dong Wushong. Dong Wushong nodded. As he spoke, the medicine of the heavy pill flowed. The Black Devil groaned softly and actually opened his eyes. His gaze was still indifferent and cold, but it seemed to have a different charm. It seemed to be longing. He looked around and revealed a disappointed expression. Haha, so I'm still alive. The Black Devil said softly. His voice was filled with disappointment. I thought that I would finally be able to see Lei Ye's mother, Sai. Everyone was speechless. King of Hell Chu, the Black Devil said softly. What's the matter? Chu Yang walked up. In my belt, there's the bone-gnawing heart-burning grass and 7 wonders exquisite demon. He panted. I've already ground them into powder and put them in a secret compartment in my belt. Take it out and give it to Dong Wushong and Lei. Chu Yang nodded and comforted him. Rest well. You won't die. As for the future, no matter if it's enmity, gratitude, or resentment, we'll talk about it after you recover. It's good enough that I'm still alive. The Black Devil's mouth twitched as if he was smiling. His body relaxed as he lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling of the tent. But I don't want to recover. I've given up, the Black Devil said quietly. No matter if it's enmity, gratitude, or resentment, I've given up. Everyone was stunned. I've spent my entire life killing people. Killing people is my life. The Black Devil laughed hoarsely. If there's any karma, I won't be able to redeem it even if I reincarnate 10,000 times. Since I can't redeem it, I might as well not redeem it. If I can live, I think I'll just let it be. Even if I can still breathe, I won't be able to live for more than a few years. The Black Devil smiled faintly and said, let's just live the last few years peacefully. Just live the life of an ordinary person. I've really never lived such a life. Dong Wushong, I'll look after the door for you in the future and plant flowers for you. After I'm done with this life, I'll be able to see my daughter Lei get married. Dong Wushong hugged Mo Lei and was so stunned that he couldn't speak. The Black Devil is gone. The Black Devil said, what's my name again? He thought for a long time and said, I remember that I'm called Mo Zhuliu, right? Then I'll be called Mo Zhuliu from now on. After saying that, the Black Devil smiled and fell asleep as if he had let go of everything. He didn't ask Dong Wushong for anything. When he saw Dong Wushong hugging his daughter, he was completely relieved. His daughter had found a home. How she lived was her own business. He was the father-in-law and didn't care about those things. Everyone was silent for a while. Then, they quietly retreated. The monarch-level battle in the afternoon. Chu Yang looked at the martial emperors who were cleaning up the battlefield and said lightly, "The She clan is anxious." Mo Tianji was concerned about something else. He glanced around. "Let me say a few words. Although my family is in a rural area, it can be considered the largest family in our area. There are many people. My grandfather has 5 brothers, my father has 8 brothers, and I also have an aunt. My mother's family is also not small. She has 10 brothers and sisters, 7 of my biological uncles, and 2 of my aunts. As for those who are close by blood, I don't even know how many. And they're basically all old. I'll never think about what will happen tomorrow. Living in the countryside, such things are trivial and complicated. And there will be many things. But there's one thing, I'll say it, but I'll never stop updating. I feel that as an author, this is enough. As for my life, I'm writing about it to let everyone understand that if something happens, take note, it's if I don't update in time or stop updating. Everyone should be mentally prepared and forgive me. In fact, it's just a precaution. That's all. As for earning sympathy, I'll say it coldly. In today's society, who the fuck sympathizes with who? That's all I have to say. If anyone curses my clan again, don't blame me for cursing your ancestors, especially those who came to the original book review section to curse and curse after reading pirated versions. Who do you think you are? Chapter 704. On the She clan's ice and snow platform, Shi Chengyu was already restless. The anger on his face was almost uncontrollable. There were more than 30 martial emperors who had just died. They were all from the She clan. Moreover, he had died under such an unimaginable betrayal. How could Shi Chengyu not be heartbroken? How could he not be angry? They deserved it. Jimo snorted. The Li clan is also anxious, Chu Yang said plainly. The Li clan's forces in the upper 3 heavens had all been wiped out after the battle with the martial emperors. They were only left with one martial monarch. They were like a seedling in a 3,000-mile area. They were extremely pitiful. How could Li Biatian not be anxious? His mission here was to bring the Li clan to the upper 3 heavens. Now, it seemed like he was only going to bring a bunch of spirit tablets back. No, at least there was still Li Xiong too, who was half dead. Master Moji, I don't think this duel is fair. Tian Biyu Hui shouted. There were not many people around him anymore. There were only 7 martial monarchs and 1 martial saint left. Including himself, there was no difference between him and a general without an army. In the battle just now, the Zhao clan master and the Li clan master were all martial emperors. However, they had all died in this battle. The difference between Tian Biyu Hui and a general without an army was that there were only 7 of them left. How is it unfair? The white-bearded Moji frowned. The Black Devil's incident was purely a scheme. They arranged it. I think this doesn't conform to the rules of the battle. Tian Biyu Hui gritted his teeth and shouted. What a joke. Chu Yang snorted and said, how is this unfair? We didn't arrange anything. Even if we did, what can you do about it? If you have the ability to plant a spy in our team, we won't say anything. The problem is, you can't do it. Since you can't do it, then shut up. The white-bearded Moji nodded, you're right. The battle doesn't allow other people to fight. It doesn't allow people of a higher level to fight. However, there's no rule that says you can't play tricks in the battle. Mo Tianji said, Lord Law Enforcer, you're absolutely right. Furthermore, if you're talking about unfairness, I would like to ask you about it. More than 30 Emperor-level experts have mysteriously appeared in your camp. Did all of them fall from the sky? He sneered and said, even if we have Heimo is still a member of the 3 heavens. Tian Biyu Hui was speechless. This was what he was most afraid of right now. The white-bearded cultivator looked at him coldly. He didn't say anything and said, the battle between monarchs will take place immediately. Mo Tianji whispered into Chu Yang's ear, there seems to be one more martial monarch-level expert on the other side. Chu Yang nodded heavily. We have 7 monarch-level experts on our side. The other side has one more than us. They originally had 8 monarch-level experts. However, the 2 black demons withdrew from the martial monarchs yesterday. There should only be 1 martial monarch left. But now, they have 7 martial monarchs. It's obvious that they hid one of them before the battle. 7 against 7. Chu Yang was worried. No matter how one looked at it, the future of this monarch-level battle was uncertain. No one could calculate the real result. They could only rely on their luck. Other than the Tu clan, the Tian clan, and the Li clan, there was no one else. However, the additional 4 people should be the reinforcements from the Shi clan of the upper 3 heavens. The most terrifying ones were those 4 people. On my side, I have 1 from the Dong clan, 1 from the Xie clan, and 5 from the Ao clan, and the greatest chance of victory on my side is the 5 old ancestors of the Ao clan. Mo Tianji pondered for a while but still couldn't make up his mind. In the end, he gritted his teeth and made a decision. Elder Dong, Elder Xie, when the battle starts, you and the 2 martial monarchs of the Ao clan will hold back the 4 people from the Shi clan of the upper 3 heaven. Then, the 3 old ancestors of the Ao clan went all out to deal with the monarchs of the Tian clan, Tu clan, and Li clan. This is the only advantage we can use. Xie Qiu and the others solemnly agreed. This was their only chance. Their greatest reliance was the fact that the 3 martial monarchs of the Tian, Tu, and Li clan did not have much contact with each other, much less any tacit understanding. However, the 3 ancestors of the Ao clan had lived together for hundreds of years. This tacit understanding would be the key to victory or defeat in this battle. However, didn't the 4 monarch realm experts of the Shi family have a tacit understanding? Therefore, they still had no confidence. Are you confident? Mo Tianji's face darkened. He looked at the serious faces of the martial monarchs and asked. I'm not confident. The oldest martial monarch of the Ao clan shook his head honestly. He was the one with the highest cultivation among them. I can't see through the martial monarch of the other side at all. Therefore, his cultivation should be higher than mine. Everyone was a little shocked. If the other side had such a strong person, then it was enough to decide the outcome of this battle. Mo Tianji's expression changed drastically. After a long while, he said word by word with great difficulty, this battle concerns the future generations. We can't lose. If we are not confident, if we are not confident. He repeated this sentence twice. Then, he shut his mouth and looked at these monarch-level experts. Then, he bowed deeply. If there's no hope of victory, then the only hope is to perish together with them, dragging the other party along with us. If we really want to do this, we have to do it right from the start. He suddenly raised his head and said, fight to the death, fight to the death. Seniors, if you step out of this battle, you will die. However, the key is how you die. You have to die with value. How you die, you have to die with strategy. Mo Tianji smiled bitterly. I didn't want to say this, but I have no choice. If I don't say it, others won't say it either. If we misjudge the situation because of this, the consequences will be serious. None of us can bear it. Therefore, I can only say it. Everyone was silent. What Mo Tianji said was the cruelest method. It was also the most effective method at the moment. These words were indeed something that only Mo Tianji could say. No one else could bear to say it so directly, although this was the truth. But when said, it was so cruel and heartless. The martial monarch of the Ao clan laughed and said, we have lived for so long. It is enough. This battle concerns the future generations. We cannot lose. If we fight, we lose slowly, but we will still die in the end. The other side can live. If we fight with our lives, we might even drag them down with us. Then, why not take this price? Naturally, we old men have thought of this. The 7 martial monarchs smiled at the same time. From now on, the big clans will have to rely on the younger generation. Xie Qiu looked at Xie Danqiong. Xie Danqiong's heart ached. Tears flowed down. Everyone's heart was heavy. They didn't know what to say. Just as Mo Tianji said, this battle, this step, as long as you take it, you will die. The key was how you die, and how you die. That was all. Just as everyone was worried, this battle finally started. The 14 martial monarchs were all old men with white beards. No one would have thought that a battle between two martial monarchs would turn out to be this tragic before the start of the battle. Once the battle started, both sides rushed out as if they were flying. 7 against 7. Everyone had their own target. Xie Qiu smiled faintly. He suddenly sped up and met his opponent. His opponent was the martial monarch of the Tu clan. The two of them knew each other. This martial monarch of the Tu clan was obviously filled with emotions. Looking at Xie Qiu rushing over, a trace of helplessness flashed in his eyes. He opened his mouth and said, "Old Xie," but before he could finish his words, he saw Xie Qiu approaching like a shooting star. His heart skipped a beat. He pointed his sword forward. But what was even more unexpected was that Xie Qiu didn't dodge his probing sword at all. Xie Qiu's sword blocked slightly and pierced into Xie Qiu's chest. Xie Qiu's body smashed into his chest like a thunderbolt. A thin and long sword pierced into his heart. At the same time, he wildly punched and kicked the chest of this martial monarch of the Tu clan. There was a cracking sound. The two of them separated. This martial monarch of the Tu clan only had time to throw 2 punches before he collapsed. Xie Qiu only had time to hurriedly say, "Don't hate me. Let's fight again in the yellow spring. I will accompany you." Then, he turned around and left. This martial monarch of the Tu clan looked at him in surprise. Finally, he smiled and closed his eyes. He understood Xie Qiu's words. He understood. Because his sword had also pierced into Xie Qiu's heart. Xie Qiu must die. Old bastard, you are so despicable. I will wait for you in the yellow spring. Xie Qiu jumped up with the sword in his chest. His body was bathed in blood. He entered the battle between the martial monarchs of the Li clan and Dong clan like lightning. He didn't dodge or hide. He took 3 swords, 7 kicks, and 1 punch from his opponent. Then, he chopped off half of his opponent's shoulder. The martial monarchs of the Dong clan roared at the same time. They chopped this martial monarch of the Li clan in half. Xie Qiu was also chopped in half. Then, he left and rushed to another battle ring. "Old friend, don't blame me. We will settle accounts in the yellow spring. I will be there." Xie Qiu used a suicidal attack. It was like a thunderbolt flashing. He finished the battle in an instant. He also finished himself. This scene was so fast that people couldn't see it clearly. It was already over. There was only one martial monarch left on his side. At the same time, a martial monarch of the Ao clan and a martial monarch of the Shi clan of the upper 3 heavens laughed bitterly and fell down together. They were just like Xie Qiu and the other 2. They had first paid with their lives, and then killed each other. However, this martial monarch of the Ao clan wasn't as lucky as Xie Qiu. He didn't have time to use his last life to fight again. However, he finally succeeded in dragging someone with him. The other martial monarch of the Ao clan successfully fought against a martial monarch of the Tian clan. The 2 of them chopped off each other's sword-wielding hands. Then, the 2 of them hugged each other. They were martial monarchs. However, they were like hooligans fighting on the streets. They punched and kicked each other. "You beat me to death. I beat you to death." Then, the 2 of them stopped moving. The 2 old men with white beards looked at each other with blood on their faces. Their eyes were full of understanding. Chapter 705. The 2 martial monarchs smiled at each other as they fought. They were different from the martial monarchs in the upper 3 heavens who relied on elixirs and resources to reach this stage. They relied on the accumulation of time and their own hard work, as well as thousands of killings. Hence, at their age and realm, they were already indifferent to life and death. The only thing they couldn't let go of was their descendants. Their descendants were the reason why they were fighting today. Now that they were going to die together, it was the best ending for them. They could answer to their descendants, and they could answer to themselves. Hence, they didn't feel any reluctance or despair. Instead, they felt relaxed and relieved. Finally, it was over. Then, they laughed and slashed at each other's throats. Then, their bodies twitched at the same time and they stopped moving. The 4 martial monarchs and the remaining 3 martial monarchs from the Shi clan were engaged in a crazy battle. Even if I die, I will kill the enemy. Even if I die one by one, I will drag one down with me. Such a terrifying mentality, such a cruel battle, caused every spectator to tremble in fear. Martial monarchs were supposed to fight in the air like celestials. Even if they died in battle, there would be an extreme sense of beauty. But now, it was a completely different matter. The battle started with blood and death. As soon as the battle continued, severed limbs flew all over the sky. The 3 martial monarchs of the Shi clan were in a sorry state. The few of them didn't want to risk their lives. They weren't as open-minded as the Tian clan, Tu clan, and Li clan. I'm only here to help. What does it matter to me who wins or loses? Furthermore, I'm not here to help. I have other things to do. With such a mentality, it was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to fight against the 4 martial monarchs who were risking their lives. They could only defend and didn't dare to attack. Because when they attacked, they would give the others a chance to attack. These 4 martial monarchs were even willing to sacrifice their lives to chop off one of their arms, to such an extent. Was this still a battle between humans? The 3 martial monarchs complained in their hearts. Even when they were fighting against the 3 Stars Divine Clan and the spiritual beasts, it wasn't as tragic as this. However, they didn't have the chance to retreat or admit defeat in this battle. This was the Lake of Despair. It was a standard place for decisive battles to take place under the supervision of the Dharma Executor and surrounded by the supreme martial artist's divine sense. The only way to end the battle was for one side to be completely wiped out. He would not rest until he was dead. Fortunately, that 4th grade monarch level expert was doing his best to defend. So, he was barely able to maintain the current stalemate. However, it was obvious that this was not a long-term solution. What should we do? One of the monarch level experts asked anxiously as he blocked the enemy's attacks in a flurry. What else can we do? Kill them. The monarch level expert who was the leader of the group was very angry. Damn it, if something like this happens in the future, I'll run as far as I can. Damn it, I thought that this time I came to the upper 3 heavens to catch snails with my 5 fingers, or to be a tiger in a group of monkeys. Who would have thought that I would have to pay with my life? This fucking world is too wonderful, but how do we kill them? The monarch level expert who asked the question was on the verge of tears. You make it sound as easy as farts. How can I not know that I can get out of this predicament by killing them? But the problem was, how could he kill him without paying a price? Kill them however you want to. The monarch level expert from the Shi clan was distracted for a moment and was almost pierced by 4 swords at the same time. He was so scared that his soul almost left his body. After cursing, he stopped talking and focused on the enemy. However, the remaining 3 monarch level experts from the Ao clan and the Dawn clan's monarch level experts' attacks were getting more and more intense. The more the other party defended, the more likely it was for them to perish together. Finally, there was a scream. A monarch level expert from the Shi clan could not help but expand his sword a little. However, the Dawn clan's monarch level expert rushed into the sword light with his sword. Blood splattered everywhere as the Dawn clan's monarch level expert pounced over ferociously. He was already close. The Shi clan's monarch level expert shouted and stabbed his sword madly. The Dawn clan's monarch level expert smiled calmly. He did not even look and suddenly turned his body. He forcefully stopped the sword that pierced his chest and ruthlessly chopped off the right shoulder of the Shi clan's monarch level expert. Then, he leaped up and endured the attacks of the other 2 experts. He hugged the Shi clan's monarch level expert tightly and opened his mouth. His white teeth sank deep into the throat of the Shi clan's monarch level expert. Blood spurted out with a puff. The Shi clan's monarch level expert's arm and shoulder were broken. He was screaming in pain when he was held tightly by the other party. Then, he could not scream anymore and the 2 of them fell down together. There was one less person. That 4th grade monarch knew that he could not drag on any longer. Once he was left alone, the situation would be even worse. He waved his sword and fiercely swung it. The vigorous spiritual chi even made the sky tremble. The sword pierced out with a terrifying explosive force. Even if you want to perish together with me, if you take this sword head-on, you will be completely blown apart by the sword chi. You can't attack me at all. However, the two monarch-level experts of the Ao clan did not dodge. They laughed and rushed forward. The sword pierced into the chest of the first monarch. However, in this short moment, the monarch had already thrown out his sword. The sword was like a bolt of lightning. The sword chi exploded in the body of the Ao clan's monarch. At the same time, the monarch of the Ao clan was still rushing forward. The exploded flesh and blood splattered all over the Sha clan's monarch's body and face. The sword had also pierced deeply into his shoulder. Then, it came out of his body, opening up a transparent bloody hole in his shoulder. He screamed in pain and retreated hastily. However, the other martial monarch of the Ao clan had already rushed out from the explosion. It was two people who had rushed up just now. He fiercely swung his sword horizontally, wanting to block the martial monarch of the Ao clan. However, just as the two swords were about to come into contact, the sword suddenly retreated, and the person's chest slanted forward. With a pu sound, the sword pierced through the Ao clan's monarch-level expert's pumpkin soup and pierced through his shoulder blade. The martial monarch of the Ao clan sneered and twisted his body. He twisted his body along with the sword in his body. This martial monarch of the Sha clan was still holding the sword in his hand. He wanted to pull it back, but when he twisted his hand was twisted along with the sword. He instantly felt that something was wrong. He quickly exerted strength and slashed horizontally with his sword. In this split second, the sword pierced through the lower abdomen of this fourth-grade martial monarch. Then, the sword was swung upwards. From the lower abdomen to the throat, the entire chest and abdomen was cut open. His 5 viscera were cut open and flowed out with a crash. However, with a sweep of his sword, this supreme elder of the Ao clan was also cut into 2 by his sword. The upper half of his body that was sent flying still had a calm smile on his face. He flipped his hand and threw the sword back. It accurately pierced through the back of the martial monarch's head. Then, the upper half of the Ao clan's monarch's body fell to the ground. A mocking and relieved smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. It is said that the difference of 1 level between a martial monarch and a martial monarch is like heaven and earth. However, I have successfully killed a 4th-grade martial monarch with the strength of a peak 3rd-grade martial monarch. With this result, I have no regrets in my life. Then, his head tilted and he died. The martial monarch of the Sha clan was stabbed in the back of his head. His chest and abdomen were all cut open. However, he still didn't die. He was still screaming in disbelief. He used his hands to stuff the intestines that had already fallen to the ground back into his stomach. He stuffed them in, they flowed out, and he stuffed them in again. After struggling for a while, he seemed to realize that his head was in pain. He reached out and touched the hilt of a sword. He yelled and pulled the sword out. Then, his brain matter spurted out more than 100 feet. Finally, he swayed and turned half a circle before falling down with a plop. He opened his soulless eyes. He wasn't willing to give up. He said in a low voice, "It has been 3 days. How can I die?" Then, he didn't make any more sound. The battle between the 14 experts had turned into a one-on-one fight between 2 people in the blink of an eye. The martial monarch of the Ao clan was still smiling faintly. It was as if he didn't care about the deaths of his brothers. He was only attacking the enemy with all his might. But his eyes were already filled with a deathly stillness. The martial monarch of the Sha clan opened his eyes wide. He was scared out of his wits. When he saw his boss die in the most tragic way, he lost all his courage to fight. He screamed and turned to run. "Where are you going?" The ancestor of the Ao clan shouted coldly. His sword turned into a dragon as he chased after him. He stabbed with his sword. The martial monarch of the Sha clan only had time to shout, "Spare," before he was pierced through from the back to the chest. He lowered his head and saw the bloody sword sticking out of his chest. He smiled bitterly and said, "Can't you spare my life?" Then, his eyes went blank. His body slid down from the sword and fell to the ground. He stopped breathing. The martial monarch of the Ao clan looked at the body of his enemy and said indifferently, "I'm afraid not." The battle was over. Chu Yang's side had won. Such a result was out of everyone's expectations, especially the aristocratic clans and those who were watching the battle. After thinking about it, they understood. The people on this side were all prepared to die. They didn't have any hope of surviving. However, the martial monarch of the She clan only wanted to save his own life. The mentality of the two sides were completely different. Although the one with the highest cultivation was half a grade higher than the other, such a result wasn't surprising. Both sides were very quiet. There was no sound at all. "We won, right?" The martial monarch of the Ao clan raised his eyebrows and asked the martial monarch of the Ao clan. "Yes. Please announce it as soon as possible," he requested quietly. After hearing the martial monarch of the Ao clan announce their victory, the martial monarch of the Ao clan revealed a comforting smile. He smiled and said, "If you don't announce it, how can I bring this news to them? How can they not know the result of the last battle that they personally participated in?" He laughed and said, "Old guys, we've been together for so many years. We've fought for our lives. How can you all die and I'm the only one left?" Ao Xieyun was shocked. He shouted, "Ancestor, no." The martial monarch of the Ao clan laughed and said, "They're waiting for me. The last battle in this world is 7 against 7. But in the future, it can't be 7 against 7. They'll be at a disadvantage. The outcome has been decided." I'm relieved. His eyes flashed past the faces of everyone on his side. He said, "I have to go now. If I'm late, they'll be far away and I won't be able to catch up. Old guys, wait for me. Whoever dares to leave in a hurry, don't blame me for not being courteous. Compared to them, you guys can't bear to leave me." He laughed and turned his sword around. With a pu sound, it pierced into his own heart. He stood upright and muttered, "We come and go together. We die and return together." You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.